It began like any other quiet evening. A small town, wrapped in its routine calm, unaware that within hours, everything would change forever. No one could have imagined that behind one family's warm smiles and polite greetings, a dark storm was brewing. One that would soon shatter the peace of an entire community and grip the world in disbelief. This is the story of a murder so heartbreaking, so senseless, that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. The victim was a young woman named Elena Rivers, 26 years old, kind-hearted, and full of dreams. She worked as a graphic designer, loved reading mystery novels, and had recently moved into a new apartment to start fresh after a tough breakup. Her friends described her as someone who could light up a room just by walking in, but on one cold winter night, that light was brutally extinguished. At first, no one noticed she was missing. She often worked late, and sometimes stayed over at her best friend's place. But when Elena didn't show up for work for 2 days, her manager called her phone. No answer. Her family tried calling too, only to be sent straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. When police entered her apartment, they were met with an eerie silence. Everything looked normal, until they reached the living room. There, they found signs of a struggle, a broken vase, a chair knocked over, and on the floor, a single earring, bent out of shape. But there was no sign of Elena. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Detectives immediately launched a missing person investigation. They combed through security footage, interviewed neighbors, and analyzed phone records. That's when they discovered something chilling. The night she disappeared, Elena's phone last pinged near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, an area known for being deserted after dark. Officers rushed to the location, hoping she might still be alive. Inside the warehouse, under the flickering light of a police flashlight, they found her. Elena's body was hidden behind a stack of old crates. Her life stolen in a moment of unthinkable violence. The entire town fell into shock. News of the murder spread quickly, and within hours headlines were everywhere. Young woman found dead in abandoned warehouse, community devastated. Investigators knew they had to move fast. There were no witnesses, no cameras nearby, and no clear motive. But one detail stood out. Elena's phone and purse were missing. It looked like a robbery, until the autopsy revealed something darker. She hadn't just been attacked. She'd been targeted. Whoever did this knew her, and the brutality of the crime suggested it was personal. Detective Laura Hayes, who led the investigation, described it as one of the most haunting cases of her career. It wasn't random, she said later. This was rage. This was betrayal. As detectives dug into Elena's life, they uncovered a tangled web of secrets. Her recent breakup with her ex-boyfriend Daniel Cole had been more complicated than anyone realized. Friends recalled how controlling he had become toward the end of their relationship. He constantly checked her messages, questioned her every move, and showed up unannounced at her workplace. Elena had blocked his number and moved to a new apartment partly to get away from him. But as investigators soon found out, Daniel wasn't ready to let go. Police brought him in for questioning. He appeared calm, almost rehearsed, claiming he hadn't seen Elena in weeks. But inconsistencies began to appear. Security footage from a convenience store near Elena's apartment showed a man resembling Daniel buying duct tape and gloves. Just 2 days before she vanished, forensics later matched fibers from the tape found at the warehouse to the brand Daniel had purchased. Still, Daniel denied everything. He insisted it was coincidence, saying the items were for a home repair project. Detectives weren't convinced. They obtained a warrant to search his car, and there, under the seat, they found Elena's missing phone, wiped clean, but not well enough. Data recovery specialists managed to retrieve deleted messages. The last text Elena ever sent read, "Please, Daniel, leave me alone." The evidence was overwhelming. Police arrested Daniel Cole and charged him with first-degree murder. The trial that followed captivated millions. People from all over the world watched as the courtroom drama unfolded, struggling to understand how someone could destroy a life they once claimed to love. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of obsession and control. They revealed that Daniel had tracked Elena's location through a hidden app on her phone, followed her the night she disappeared, and confronted her when she refused to reconcile. The confrontation turned violent, and in his rage, Daniel ended her life. Throughout the trial, Daniel sat stone-faced, rarely showing emotion. When the verdict was read, guilty, he simply lowered his head. Elena's family wept in silence, clutching each other as justice was finally served. But for them, no sentence could ever replace the daughter, sister and friend they had lost. The story spread beyond borders, shared by millions online. People were moved not only by the tragedy, but by the haunting truth it revealed. How love, when twisted by obsession, can turn into something unrecognizable, something deadly. In the months that followed, the town where Elena lived changed forever. Candlelight vigils were held in her memory. Strangers left flowers outside her apartment building. Her former colleagues created a scholarship in her name for young women in creative arts, ensuring her passion would live on, even though she could not. But despite the conviction, questions remained. Why didn't anyone see the warning signs sooner? Could someone have intervened? Could Elena's life have been saved? Her case became a symbol, a wake-up call about the silent dangers of control, manipulation, and the red flags people often dismiss in relationships until it's too late. Even now, years later, those who knew her say they can still hear her laughter echoing in their memories. A reminder that behind every headline, every tragic story, there's a real person who deserved so much more than the fate they received. Detectives stood in Claire's apartment longer than expected, struggling to understand what they were really looking at. It wasn't a chaotic crime scene, it wasn't impulsive, it wasn't emotional, it was something far more disturbing, an act of control, a methodical removal of a person from their own life. Every detail was precise, almost ritualistic in the way it was arranged, and that notebook haunted everyone who touched it. Each page was filled with Claire's daily life recorded down to the second. The keeper described her habits with the cold precision of someone cataloging a scientific specimen. The handwriting was neat, straight, unshaken. There were no scribbles, no corrections, no fluctuations in pressure. Whoever wrote it did so with absolute calm. No remorse, no hesitation. One detail, however, stood out more than anything else. A chilling line written weeks before the murder. "She doesn't know she belongs to me." Those words were the key to unlocking the killer's mind. Detectives believed he didn't see Claire as a person with her own life, her own choices, her own identity. He saw her as a project, something he could shape, study, predict, and control. And when she behaved outside the parameters he set, he didn't see it as independence. He saw it as failure. A broken pattern, and broken things, in his mind, needed to be removed. For weeks after her death, investigators worked tirelessly. They combed through her building, interviewed neighbors, reviewed security footage from every angle, and scanned the area for any sign of the man behind the letter K. But the frustrating truth was that he left absolutely nothing behind. Not a fiber, not a shoe print, not a fingerprint, not a trace of forced entry. It was as if he walked through the walls, or as if he had been inside the apartment long before she returned home. The theory that terrified everyone the most was that the keeper had a copy of her keys, that he'd been entering the apartment for months, that he knew every corner of her life not because he watched from outside, but because he walked through it. What made the case even more chilling was that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened in the area. When detectives expanded their search, they discovered 2 other unexplained deaths from previous years, both ruled accidental, both involving young women who lived alone, both with odd inconsistencies that no one noticed before. In each case, the victims were described as quiet, predictable, private. There were subtle signs of disturbances inside their apartments, but nothing concrete enough to raise alarms at the time. The possibility that the keeper had been active for years, maybe even a decade, created a ripple of fear that spread far beyond Claire's circle. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't sloppy. He didn't escalate or retreat. He selected, observed, and removed, calmly, quietly, perfectly. And now he had vanished. The notebook was their only clue, and yet it gave them nothing about the author. No name, no handwriting match, no DNA, but hidden within its pages were patterns, strange symbols, and sequences that felt more like coded thoughts than sentences. Investigators brought in a behavioral analyst to study the entries, hoping to get inside the killer's mind. The analyst's conclusion was simple but terrifying. The author sees himself as an architect. He designs lives. Once they deviate from the blueprint, he ends them. The case turned into a psychological maze. The more they studied the keeper's words, the more they realized he wasn't driven by anger, obsession, or desire. He was driven by structure. He didn't kill because he wanted to. He killed because he believed he had to when his subject no longer fit the design he created. That belief made him far more dangerous than any typical predator. He didn't fear consequences. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't want fame. He wanted control. And someone who kills for control doesn't stop on their own. Months passed with no leads. The town grew anxious. People who once left their doors unlocked began installing cameras and alarm systems. Parents warned their children about staying alone too often. Neighbors formed watch groups. The silence that once made the town peaceful now made it unbearable. But the most frightening part of the entire case was what happened 6 months later. A package was delivered to the detective leading the investigation. It had no return address, no fingerprints, no tracking information. Inside the small box was a single item. Another notebook. This one was thinner, darker, and far more meticulous. Every page documented a new routine, a new person, a new life being studied. But this time, the entries didn't end with observation. They ended with the words, "She's almost ready." The worst part wasn't the content. It was the date. The last entry was written 3 days before the package arrived. They were looking at a life being stalked in real time. For the first time since Claire's murder, investigators felt real panic. They mobilized overnight, trying to identify the woman described in the notebook. She was young. She lived alone. She had a consistent schedule. The details matched dozens of potential victims across the area. The team worked relentlessly, racing against time to find her before she became the next completed project. The final clue came from a tiny detail in the notebook, a mention of a distinctive red mailbox at the end of her street. That detail narrowed the search from hundreds of homes to 6. They split into teams, knocking on doors, praying they weren't too late. They reached the 3rd house and found her alive, confused, terrified. She had no idea she was being watched. No idea that someone tracked her movements so precisely. No idea that her life was hours away from being rewritten forever. Detectives immediately moved her to safety, installed surveillance and prepared for the keeper's return. But he never came. Not that night, not the next, not ever. He vanished completely, leaving nothing behind except 2 notebooks and a series of unanswered questions. Did he know they found her? Did he choose another victim? Was he still watching from the shadows? Or worst of all, was he someone they had already met? The case remains open, unsolved, and deeply feared within law enforcement circles. To this day, detectives who worked it refuse to talk about it without glancing over their shoulders, because they understand one terrifying truth. You can catch a killer who acts on emotion. You can catch a killer who leaves a trail, but you can't catch a ghost who kills for order. Some stories are twisted. This one is engineered.